Good evening. For those of you that I've not yet met, my name is Joanne Drake, and I'm the Chief Administrative Officer of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you here this evening. And now, in honor of our men and women in uniform who risk their lives to defend our freedom around the world, I'd like to ask all of you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. Before we get started tonight, I would like to recognize some special guests that we have with us. Laura Sullivan, to whom the book Rawhide Down is dedicated, the wife of our author this evening, the mother of 2 children, and an award-winning investigative correspondent for NPR. Her work has not only shed light on the lives of some of the country's most disadvantaged people, but has also helped to improve them. Laura? Also with us, this evening are a number of retired Secret Service agents who have protected President and Mrs. Reagan over the years, as well as some current agents with the Secret Service, the FBI, and other men and women from agencies across the country who spend every day keeping us safe. This is a special evening for them as well. And of course, our hostess this evening, the former First Lady of the United States, who truly was the rainbow to Ronald Reagan's rawhide, Nancy Reagan. The format for this evening will not be a straight lecture. We're privileged tonight to have 2 guests of honor to talk about one day in America's history that even 30 years later should never be forgotten. We're going to hear pieces of the story from each of these gentlemen, then they will have a conversation, and we'll follow that with questions from the audience. Our first guest this evening may not yet be a household name for this generation, but I don't think that's going to last for long. And I say this generation because Del Quentin Wilber was a household name for my parents' and grandparents' generation. He was a major league catcher for the St. Louis Cardinals, Philadelphia Phillies, and Boston Red Sox. And according to the official baseball register, Del Wilber had a unique hobby during his catching career. When a pitcher hurled an especially noteworthy game, Mr. Wilber would decorate a game baseball, writing the line score of the game, as well as the game highlights, on that ball and then present it to his pitcher. Writing seems to run in this family, and that brings us to the Del Wilber that is here this evening. Our Del Wilber is his grandson, who grew up in Massachusetts and, like every other kid in New England, became obsessed with the Boston Red Sox. I'm guessing he has spent hundreds, probably thousands of hours at Fenway Park and has seen more than 1 home run fly over the Green Monster in left field. Our Del Wilber graduated with an undergraduate degree in journalism from Northwestern University. In his first job with the Baltimore Sun, he literally uncovered a huge dead fish story along Maryland's eastern shore, and then triggered a successful conviction of Baltimore's chief of police on corruption charges. In 2002, Del Wilber led the paper's coverage of the D.C. sniper shootings. His story was so well crafted that he later became a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. In 2004, Del joined the staff of the Washington Post as the D.C. police reporter. He patiently worked through the wall of mistrust that cops generally have for reporters, and soon gained the confidence of the police department's top officers, as well as numerous cops on the street, which ultimately allowed Del to get unusual access to the inner workings of the department. In 2006, Del became the Washington Post's national aviation writer. Del was fascinated by airplanes. And as I'm starting to know him a little more, I wasn't surprised to learn that in order to better understand his assignment, he also became a licensed private pilot. After being promoted by the paper to cover the federal courts in 2008, he attended a hearing for John W. Hinckley, Jr., one of many that have been held over the years to determine whether Mr. Hinckley has recovered enough to be given his freedom from the mental hospital where he now resides. I think I'm going to suggest to Del that this strange twist of justice be the topic of his next book. Following that hearing, and an interesting encounter at the headquarters of the FBI, which I hope Del will share with us this evening, Del got the idea to write Rawhide Down. It is a comprehensive, fascinating, and often very emotional account of the near assassination of one of America's most beloved presidents. I found myself in tears on more than one occasion while reading it. Many of you here may know the basic elements of the assassination attempt on March 30th, 1981, only 70 days into the Reagan presidency. I'm sure every one of you has heard an anecdote or two that puts an important human face on that day. Or maybe you've read the president's personal diary, whose entry wasn't actually written at the end of that day, as he normally would do, but was penned days later by the president as he recovered in the ICU. It starts with Monday, March 30, my day to address the Building and Construction Trades National Conference, AFL-CIO, at the Hilton Ballroom. He goes on to describe the shooting and the trip to the hospital, and then further down we read, "Getting shot hurts. Still, my fear was growing because no matter how hard I tried to breathe, it seemed as I was getting less and less air." And then later, "I opened my eyes once to find Nancy there. I pray I'll never face a day when she isn't there. Of all the ways God has blessed me, giving her to me is the greatest and beyond anything I can ever hope to deserve." Del interviewed more than 125 people for this book. He tracked down never-before-seen hospital and government documents, as well as tape recordings and reams of material from the Hinckley trial. He even sweet-talked me into asking Mrs. Reagan for permission to see the notes handwritten by the president on pink hospital charts just after the operation to remove the bullet from his lung when he still had a breathing tube in and couldn't speak. Del spent hundreds of hours collecting the segments of this story and has skillfully pieced it together in a captivating way. It goes without saying that it's well-written and informative, but I highly recommend it as a book that is easily readable and hard to put down, much like a best-selling novel. Our second guest this evening also may not be a household name in your household, but he certainly is in the Reagan household, in my household, and those of every man and woman who worked at the Reagan White House over the years. We all admired and respected Jerry Parr before Del Wilber's book was released, but now I think you will too. Jerry Parr saved President Reagan's life not once, but twice in the span of less than 5 minutes. And I don't know if you all believe in fate or having the hand of the Lord guiding you through life, but I do. Jerry Parr wasn't even supposed to be traveling with the president on March 30th, 1981. As we look back at Jerry Parr's life, we see that after 13 years as a lineman with the local electric company in Florida and some time in the United States Air Force, Jerry finally decided to go to college. He was then lured by the intrigue of the United States Secret Service. It turns out that as a boy, he'd been fascinated by a movie called The Code of the Secret Service, whose lead character, Lieutenant Brass Bancroft, was played by a young actor named Ronald Reagan. Jerry joined the Secret Service in 1962, becoming the oldest rookie in his training class. He rose through the ranks quickly and ended up on the vice presidential protective details of Hubert Humphrey and Spiro Agnew. In 1979, Jerry Parr became the lead agent for then-President Jimmy Carter, taking him through the grind of the 1980 campaign against then-former Governor Ronald Reagan. Secret Service agents will tell you that as a part of their training, they must become virtually non-political, as they are tasked with protecting people from the entire range of the political spectrum, and they must be prepared to risk their own lives for the lives of their protectees, no matter who they are or what they represent. And so it was that on Inauguration Day, January 20th, 1981, Jerry Parr rode to the U.S. Capitol in the front seat of the presidential limo, protecting the outgoing president of one political party, and drove back from the Capitol in the same seat, but protecting the incoming president of the other party. Both the president and Jerry got right to work at the White House, the president beginning his changes to turn the country around, Jerry to learn the routine of a new chief executive. 70 days later, though, Jerry Parr still felt that he didn't know the president well enough, And in order to be an effective agent, he really needed that innate understanding of his boss's likes, dislikes, natural body movements, instincts, and personal preferences. So instead of working in the office that day, where he was scheduled to catch up on paperwork, Jerry swapped duties with one of his deputies. President Reagan departed the White House with Jerry Parr in the front seat of the limousine. They were headed to what everyone assumed would be a standard speaking engagement at a local Washington, D.C. hotel. The rest, as they say, may be history, but there's nothing standard about it. When that speech was over and the president was departing the hotel, with a honed discipline and an acute and immediate sense of danger, Jerry Parr quickly threw Ronald Reagan into the presidential limousine and out of the way of an assassin's stream of bullets. Within barely minutes, Jerry saved the president's life once more by ordering the vehicle to the emergency room at George Washington University Hospital instead of returning to the White House. After reading this book, you will all have a better sense of that tragic day. You will read of a president with the Secret Service code name Rawhide, a leader of exceptional charm who inspired affection and admiration in everyone who worked with him, as well as those who came to know him on that day and this week, exactly 30 years ago. You will learn that Ronald Reagan was the only serving U.S. president to survive being shot in an assassination attempt. And you will learn the truth about what only a few have known over the intervening years, that our nation's 40th president came within minutes of dying. You will come to know the players, Jerry Parr and the other heroes that emerged from this tragedy, Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy, Washington police officer Thomas Delahanty, and White House press secretary Jim Brady, as well as the doctors, the nurses, and members of the emergency trauma team. You will also read of the extraordinary connection and love between Ronald and Nancy Reagan, a bond so strong that after hearing only that there had been a shooting, and before anyone, including the president himself, even knew that he had taken a bullet, Mrs. Reagan could sense that something was wrong and felt the tug of her heart pulling her to go be with her husband. Over the objections of her own Secret Service agent, who told her it might not be safe, she insisted on going to the hospital, even telling him that if he couldn't drive her, she would find her own car or walk. The president knew it immediately, but we now know how important her presence was to his swift recovery. If you haven't already read this book, I hope you will get a copy of Rawhide Down. It is now on the bestseller list of the New York Times. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Del, Quentin Wilber, and Jerry Parr.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll start. So it's usually good to start this talk with why a 36-year-old Washington Post reporter decided to tackle this historic day. You think, well, I was only 6 years old when the shooting happened, and I have no recollection of the event at all. So many people come up to me at signings and readings and other things, and they say, I remember being in the Sears Roebuck and being captivated by the television coverage, and they have these deep, or listening to it on the radio in my car, these other things, and they have this deep personal connection to this day. It's one of those moments in American history that forms like a consciousness for the whole society. I didn't have that benefit. I actually came to this, I covered the federal courts for the Washington Post, and in 2008 I covered a hearing involving John Hinckley. And Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity for shooting Reagan, Jim Brady, Tom Delahanty, the DC police officer, and Tim McCarthy, and after his 1982 trial. And it was kind of an interesting hearing. I was covering it, and they were talking about Hinckley's sex life and his relationships with women, and he just had this blank expression on his face that was so bizarre to me. I was 15 feet away from him. It was as if someone had cast a mask of his face while he was sleeping, and they put it on that face during the hearing. There was no emotion. And that's what stuck with me. And I remember, wow, that's kind of interesting. I wrote my story, and when you're a busy newspaper reporter, you're writing lots of stories, and you kind of file it away and move on. And about a week later, a few days, a week later, I got a call to the Washington field office of the FBI. The head of the field office wants to talk to me. He's very nervous and upset that I've heard about an undercover investigation involving Ethiopian taxi drivers. It has nothing to do with Ronald Reagan or Hinckley or anything. Ethiopian taxi drivers, bribery scandal. And I go in and they're like, it's a wiretap investigation for 2 years. If you publicize this, you'll kill our case, whatever. I'm like, okay, I get it, whatever. I can't believe I've been brought over here for this. Must be a big case. File that away for when it breaks. Maybe I can break that story. And he gets up from his desk and he gets up from the conference table where we're sitting and he goes to a desk drawer. And I hear him rummaging around in a drawer and he comes over and slaps something in my hand. And I look down, and it's a gun. I went, whoa, I didn't expect this at the FBI today. And it's a little revolver. And he goes, that's John Hinckley's gun. I look down and go, what's John Hinckley's gun doing in your desk drawer? Shouldn't it be in a museum or something? And he's like, well, yeah, he gives this complicated explanation. I eventually come to determine it's kind of one of those conversation starters or whatever. And evidently through that, after I put this in the book, other reporters have come up to me and said, he did the same thing to me. And I'm like, I bet you wish you thought of doing a book about it after that moment, huh? And so I'm sitting there, and I'm curious about it now. I've had these two brushes with history. I kind of believe in fate. And I'm like, I've been looking to try to do a book or a long magazine story. And I went to the public library. Not a single book on this day. There's one on the 25th Amendment in this day, and one really good one on the trial, but nothing on this day. And that got me curious, like, how has history treated this day, which in my mind is as important to history as if an assassination had happened, because they both affect history in their own way. They both change things. And so I'm like, maybe I'll take a flying leap on this. I've covered law enforcement for a long time, and I've never had a great deal of luck penetrating the Secret Service. It's secret for a reason. And so I'm going to give Jerry Parr a call and just see if he'll talk to me. I call Jerry Parr and I get a message back. Oh, yeah, I'll meet with you. Let's go to lunch at Krupin's Deli up near his house in Northwest Washington. Okay, this is promising. Then we go up and we have roast beef sandwiches and we're talking. And after 2 hours of Jerry Parr talking, you can't get him to stop. Talk. And I'm like, holy cow, there's a great story here that no one has told. So then I call a couple doctors and I call some more people. And then I file FOIAs for documents that no one has seen before, and I get those documents. And pretty soon I've collected like 10,000 pages of records on one day. And I go, you know what? I am going to try to write a history of one 24-hour period in American history. Now that's a challenge to do all that. But for me, and after doing all this research, which you don't need to hear about all the tedious stuff or how hard it was to figure out the color of the bricks at the Park Central Hotel where Hinckley stayed, because all the photos are black and white and the building got torn down, and you want that image in your book, what color the bricks were. And I couldn't find it. I came to determine that Ronald Reagan was far luckier to have lived than a lot of people think, or a lot of people know. And what you think you know about this day, you really don't. I mean, everyone has seen the iconic video of him being shot outside the Hilton here, right? Everyone's seen it. And everyone's heard, the funny line when he saw Mrs. Reagan and said, honey, I forgot to duck. What a great line. But what I really came to determine was that he was really lucky to have lived, and his life hung in the balance of a split second decision, and a mere inch. And sometimes it's helpful if I set the scene so you understand what I'm talking about. So it's March 30th, 1981. Reagan's delivering this speech to the Washington Hilton Hotel to the AFL-CIO Trades and Constructions Group. And Ronald Reagan, as pretty much everyone here knows, was the head of the Screen Actors Guild. And so he had felt a personal connection to this speech. And I found it fascinating as I was doing my research. As an outsider, I'm not a presidential historian, and I didn't know much about Reagan, but I read a lot about him, and I started reading more and more and interviewing a lot of his associates, that he had a real firm political consciousness when he took office, and he liked writing his own stuff. And I'm just digging through this box, and I find, oh my gosh, he rewrote the speech by hand that he delivered that day. I had no idea. There are lots of surprises in this book, and wow, he rewrote the speech by hand. And I don't want to insult the speechwriter who wrote it, Mari Massing, who is married to George Will. She did a great job. She was 26, a rookie speechwriter, but Ronald Reagan's draft was a lot better. And I mean, it really was it was fundamentally a really great speech. And later people say, oh, it was a routine speech. They thought it wasn't one of his best speeches. But I really thought it was really cool to sit there in the research area here and reading this handwritten draft that Ronald Reagan had put so much time into the day before. And so he delivers a speech, he walks off stage, And they leave through the VIP entrance of the Washington Hilton. It's 2:27 p.m. precisely. The Hilton, if anyone's seen the Washington Hilton, has everyone seen a picture of it? It's a beautiful hotel built in the 60s and has these curving facades that face downtown Washington. So everyone has a view of downtown Washington in their room. And they built a special ballroom that holds like 3,000 people and a special VIP entrance to lure presidents to this place. And from 1972 to 1982, presidents had visited this place 110 times? 110 times. So it's pretty popular. But as with all funny things in life, the people who built the Hilton didn't consult the Secret Service on what that VIP entrance should be designed like or where it should go. And there's the main T Street entrance and this driveway that winds past the VIP entrance and up towards Connecticut Avenue. It's at the corner of Connecticut Avenue and T Street Northwest, this big hotel. If you look down from the hotel from above, if you could fly above it, it looks like a seagull in flight. It's kind of a strange looking thing. And by not consulting the Secret Service, they never learned that if you drop your guy off, you drop the president off at that entrance, and then you keep going, and they made the driveway too narrow. And so if there was ever a crisis, that limousine would get stuck and jammed up on a curb and couldn't get away. So this forced the Secret Service to think, how do we get the president out of this building? And so what they devised was they'd pull the limousine back about 25 feet, facing out towards T Street, forcing Ronald Reagan to walk out of the hotel in the open. To hold back the public, they created a rope line, usually about 15 feet from the president, right? Press people, and over the years, more and more people started gathering there. And on this day, you had an assortment of media people like Sam Donaldson, who was there on the body watch in case anything happened to the president. He wanted to throw out a question about Poland. Because we can't forget, this is the height of the Cold War. The height of the Cold War, and right now, they're really worried about Soviet movement on Poland. They're really concerned about it in the government. And so the president's going to walk out. It's 2:27 p.m. It's a cloudy day. People may remember that. He walks out. Jerry Parr's on Reagan's left shoulder. 5 feet from the car, John W. Hinckley Jr., a deranged 25-year-old from Evergreen, Colorado, who thinks that stalking the president, he had stalked Carter, he had stalked Reagan, and shooting him would endear him to a movie star, Jodie Foster. We may have heard this story, but you haven't really understood Hinckley's mind until you read the transcripts of his tape-recorded phone calls to Jodie Foster as he stalked her in November 1980. And you just see the plane, she got his name wrong, all kinds of stuff like that. It was really interesting. So Reagan comes out. Hinckley pulls out a gun, and in 1.7 seconds, he unleashes 6 shots at the President of the United States. The first person to go down is James Brady. The second person to go down is Tom Delahanty, the DC police officer. The third shot goes high. Before those shots even registered to anyone else, Jerry Parr is already reacting. He has grabbed Reagan, President Reagan, and not gently at that, like a football tackle, and driving him towards that open limousine door, pushing him with all of his might to get in that door. The fourth shot hits Tim McCarthy, the Secret Service agent. He opens it without a bulletproof vest and takes it in the chest. The fifth shot hits the bulletproof window of the limousine. This is a really strange story. I could never figure it out, but that limousine's doors opened backwards, and they were known as suicide doors, because if they ever took off without having closed the door and they hit something like a fire hydrant or a pole or something, they'd rip the doors off. And so they couldn't leave without shutting the doors. And actually, one of the agents told me, I interviewed for the book, they'd actually ripped one of those doors off by accident in New York City when they took off too early. So they had to wait. So that bullet hits that window. The sixth shot cracks across the driveway, and no one knows what happened at that moment to that shot. And later, after examining the bullet pulled from Reagan's body, the bullet's flattened to a dime shape. It smacks against the side of the limousine, flips through a gap about that big, and strikes Reagan in the side as he's thrown into the car. And I would like just to read 3 paragraphs from my book that describe this scene through Jerry Parr's mind. And then we're going to switch to Jerry Parr talking about the limousine ride. And just to reiterate, in those 1.7 seconds, Jerry Parr's actually already saved Reagan's life probably twice. John Hinckley had an effective shooting range of 20 to 30 feet at stationary targets. He took a lot of target practice. Jerry Parr reacted so fast that Reagan was a moving target and couldn't be hit. If you track the trajectory of the place where Reagan was hit right about here, under his left armpit, 5 inches below the left armpit, and you track it up, if Jerry Parr is a split second slower, Ronald Reagan gets it in the head. It's that close. That's why I say split seconds matter. Jerry Parr, they're leaving the Hilton now. This is okay, right? I can tell you okay. Jerry Parr slid a step behind the president as they moved away from the VIP entrance and strode across the slick hotel driveway. Glancing up, Parr saw dark, scudding clouds. Then he scanned the crowd of reporters and spectators behind the rope line, as well as those across the street. His eye swept the limousine in the driveway. All the agents and police officers were positioned properly. Behind Parr, Ray Shattuck carried a bulletproof steel slab coated in leather, which was used to shield the president whenever he approached a crowd. Everything was in order. Walking 18 inches behind the man, the agents called Reagan the man, Parr guided Reagan toward the limousine. As always in such situations, the agent was busily plotting his response in case of an emergency. If an attack occurred, just after they'd walked out through the VIP doors, Parr would have pulled the president back into the safety of the hotel. Now, halfway to the limousine, his plan changed. If something happened, they would dive for the limousine. They would dive for the open door of the armored Lincoln. As he approached the limousine, Tim McCarthy, Reagan's point man, opened the limousine's right door. Looking toward dozens of spectators lining T Street, Reagan smiled, raised his right hand, and waved. A woman to his left shouted, "Mr. President, President Reagan." The president swiveled his head towards the rope line, raised his left arm as if to acknowledge her, and seemed to mouth the word, "Hi." Eyeing the crowd, Parr began gliding to a point just off Reagan's left shoulder, where he would be a barrier between the president and anyone trying to attack him from that side. As he continued to guide Reagan to the door, Parr heard what sounded like gunfire. Pop, pop. Instantly, Parr's hand grabbed Reagan's left shoulder, his right hand reached the president's head, and his torso swiveled into a human shield. He drove Reagan toward the open door of the Lincoln, his legs pumping like a running back driving through a defensive line. He heard another pop, then another, all in a seamless motion, part programmed, part improvised. The president grabbed and twisted, shoving Reagan forward. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Tim McCarthy turn and spread his arms wide to protect the president. Parr heard another hot pop and felt Ray Shattuck's strong hands ramming him through the limousine's open doorway. One final pop. They tumbled into a heap on the axle hump. Parr's mind raced, instantly ruling out firecrackers, balloons, and pranks. He knew it was gunfire. Someone was trying to assassinate the president. Now you take it from here.
My turn now. Thank you. Ray Shattuck shut that door, and I pushed the president from where he was on the floor under me up to a sitting position on the right-hand side, and he never sat back. He sat the whole time on the edge of the seat. As we pulled away, I saw the three bodies on the sidewalk and a bullet hole in the left window. And I knew then that it had been an attack. I thought it was because all agents know what gunfire sounds like because they shoot all the time. They're out there practicing and they know what gunfire sounds like. So we knew that it had been an attack. Now what I needed to do then was to examine him, make sure that he didn't get hit. So this was about 15 to 20 seconds into the run. We went down T Street toward the west and then south on Connecticut Avenue. We headed back to the White House at a pretty high rate of speed. But I didn't think he had been hit until I ran my hands around his body, the back, under his coat, up under his shoulders, up under his head, pushed his head down, ran my hands through his hair, and there was no blood on my hands. So that's when I radioed back to my shift leader, Ray Shattuck, and I said, "Rawhide seems to be okay. Let's head back to Crown." And that's the White House. Crown is the White House. Well, about that time, or maybe about DuPont Circle, he took a napkin out of his coat pocket, this pocket right over here like mine, and it was from the hotel, and it was a paper napkin. It was covered in bright red blood. And so I saw all this blood coming out of his mouth, a profuse amount of it. So it was frothy, and we knew from our training that this is a lung-induced injury, or lung injury. And so I took another look at him, and I looked at the blood, and I made the quick decision, let's go to GW. It was on our route. All we had to do was go straight ahead to Pennsylvania Avenue, make a right turn, 6 blocks to Washington Circle, around the circle, and into the emergency room. And that was a decision I made while I was basically on the floor, one knee on the floor, and the other just sort of touching with my feet, right in front of him. And I told the driver, Drew Unruh, I said, let's go to GW as fast as we can. In fact, during that run, I told Ray Shattuck, without breaking radio, because in those days we had analog types of radios, and any person that had a scanner could have listened to that conversation. As far as I know, no one heard that 4-minute ride to the hospital. And what he did was he didn't talk to me anymore after that. I mean, as far as his talk, I mean, it was very quiet and silent in the car. And I was talking to Drew. I said, he said, you want to go around Washington Circle the wrong way? I said, no, let's go the right way, because that would have meant maybe hitting cars head on or coming around. So we go in. It takes us about 3.5 or 4 minutes to get there. And I get out of the car. Shattuck opens the car door, and I back out, and I put my hand out like this. But he doesn't want to take it. He actually wanted to walk in. And when he walked in, he had a habit of hitching up his pants like this. And he did that. And I think Mike Deaver saw that. And so did Dave Fisher, his staff members. They saw all that. They thought he was okay. And I did too. But he was a little wobbly. So while I got the president's left side with his left arm, I held it. Shattuck got his right side, and we were sort of steadying him into the emergency room there. And when he went in about 50 feet, or maybe 35 feet, his eyes rolled back in his head. I didn't see that, somebody told me. And he just collapsed, just dead weight. And so Shattuck and I held under his arms, and another couple of people. He was very heavy, 195, 200 pounds in those days. We carried him to trauma room 5, put him on a gurney, and by that time, the people in the hospital were there, ready to work. Now, the only thing I could do then was simply to set up a security perimeter, and all these agents that are out here tonight know what that means. You start at the president's body where he is, and you cut off all access to it. And so that's what we did. So we set up a security perimeter, and we had one agent, Dale McIntosh, make sure with a nurse who belonged there and who didn't belong there. She knew who was supposed to be in that emergency room. And while it looked like a lot of chaos to strangers there, they all knew what they were doing. And what they did was save Ronald Reagan's life right there and on that. And those first 5 or 6 minutes, because I was really afraid we were going to lose him. And since I had been around when Kennedy had died, I was an agent in New York when that happened. I knew what it was for the service to lose another president, and I didn't want that to happen. So, you're going to take care of the emergency room?
Yes.
All right.
Oh.
Thank you.
I actually have a question. When Ronald Reagan insisted on walking into the hospital, what did you think?
Well, it occurred to me that he really was a cowboy. In other words, tough. Rawhide's a very good name for him. I always thought he was a very tough man, and very strong man, and very muscular, very big chest. And I remember when they were doing the operation, they were marveling at his physical prowess and his physical ability to be 70 years old and have all these muscles still in his chest and arms and everything. But what I was thinking walking in was, I knew where the emergency room was. I didn't know what bed to take him to. And I didn't know he was going to collapse either. But when he did collapse, Shattuck and I held him from his head hitting the floor. He sort of hit in a sitting position because we were holding him under the arms. And then other people helped carry him to the room in there. And I thought it was very close, because I remember one nurse saying, no blood pressure. I thought she said no, but I think she may have said low, very low. Hard to get blood pressure. And very, very low heartbeat, very faint heartbeat. And then I heard Dr. Giordano said, if you had taken him to the White House first, he may have passed.
Oh. Yes.
That's it.
I'm holding you for a minute, because you will not do this part justice, because you're too humble a guy.
Right.
So Ronald Reagan arrives into the ER and insists on walking in. And there's certain moments as a reporter, as a historian, where you interview people and you realize you do a holy cow moment. Like, what a great detail. What does this mean? It puts the whole day into a certain context. Ronald Reagan walks into the ER, insists on walking in, and then he collapses like a dead weight about 25 feet in, 20 to 25 feet in, just collapses. And there's a paramedic there, a very experienced paramedic, a guy I had dealt with, a DC paramedic when I'm a reporter. He's been that guy that long. He sees Ronald Reagan fall to the ground, and he says, in his mind, oh my God, he's Code City, which means, oh my God, he's going to die. He looked that bad. Another nurse thought he was going to die, and so did another doctor. He looked that terrible. They take him over to the gurney, the ER gurney, and they put him down. And these nurses, meanwhile, are now kind of, their hands are shaking. One nurse is thinking in her mind over and over again, please don't die, please don't die, please don't die, please don't die. It's that close. Another nurse is taking his blood pressure, and she can't get it. It's too loud. She can't hear it. She has to feel it. She's feeling his bronchial artery right here to get the blood pressure, and she finally detects it. It's 60. Normal's 140. By definition, 60 means you're in shock. Although because of this, I kind of fudged it and said indicating shock, because it's very difficult to determine someone's medical condition at that exact moment 30 years ago. They eventually get IVs into him and stuff to flood him with fluids to get that blood pressure up. And they're doing their job. They're very methodical. One nurse, in fact, threaded a 3-foot-long IV line into this arm all the way around to Reagan's heart to flood stuff in there really quickly. She's actually a technician. That technician didn't realize who she was doing that to. She was so focused on her job until she looked up after having done it and saw all the Secret Service agents, some with automatic weapons, sitting there. She looked down and saw it was Ronald Reagan. She had a momentary panic attack. I mean, can you imagine? Meanwhile, the nurse across from her is having flashbacks to John F. Kennedy and remembering going home and the one moment she'd seen her father cry ever while he was watching November 22nd, 1963 news coverage of the assassination attempt. That's what flashed into her mind. It was this dire. That nurse, the technician, had just threaded the line, looks at it. Oh my God, she thinks. She turns around, grabs some smelling salts off a shelf, sniffs it, shocks herself back into submission, and goes back to her job. And what I like to say is that Reagan was a victim, or not a victim, but Reagan was a beneficiary of circumstance for 2 reasons. In the reporting this book, I learned this. One, Jerry Parr's quick reactions that day really only occurred because of training he got in the mid-1970s, along with his ability to recognize Ronald Reagan's dire situation in that limousine. That only came about in the 1970s. They had Kennedy killed, and Kennedy gets shot in the neck, and the limousine just keeps going for 5 seconds down the road. Then he gets shot in the head. They don't take any evasive maneuvers in that car. George Wallace is shot. Laurel, Maryland, 1972. Wallace is sitting there. They let him go up the rope line and back the rope line. He's shot 4 times. An agent shot in the neck through and through from Wallace, hits him in the neck. He falls. Another agent goes after the gunman, Arthur Bremer. A third agent hesitates, because he had never really been trained on what small arms fire sounds like. So he didn't know, is it firecrackers? He hesitates. The person who covered George Wallace's body was his wife. And so what had happened was the Secret Service had an old way of doing business where they didn't train agents to react without thinking. And some agents out here in LA, Ernie Kuhn and some others, Bob Powis, these are legendary figures in the Secret Service, are sitting around one day and they go, you know, in the military, I was trained to react without thinking in these live action fire drills where you had to do something in 10 seconds or you're dead. It doesn't matter what you do, flank, attack, do something. We don't train ourselves this way. So they hooked up with the LAPD, went up to Saugus, an old drunk farm, and created such realistic drills and scenarios that some had Vietnam flashbacks. But the Secret Service adopts this training and gets people to react without thinking. So that Jerry Parr, 48, 49, 50-year-old head of the White House detail, is sweating his, off like everyone else at Beltsville, their training facility, wearing oxygen masks as you run through tear gas stuff and to react without thinking, throwing people behind podiums and doing motorcade stuff, boom, 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 boom. If you hesitate for a second, your principal is going to die. You cannot hesitate. Also, they started a 10-minute medicine course, right, where you learn these problems. They even learn how to patch up a sucking chest wound with saran wrap, right? That's pretty impressive, right? Well, that also taught Jerry how to react in that situation when you realize Reagan was such trouble. So that saves Reagan's life. Meanwhile, the hospital. These people are doing their jobs, protocol after protocol after protocol. They're not waiting for orders. They're just doing it really quick. Well, we've all seen ER. Everyone's seen the show ER, I assume. That's the way it always is, right? No. Do you realize that in the 1960s and 70s, if you were a soldier shot in Vietnam, you had a better chance of survival than if you were shot on a U.S. street corner, statistically? So as trauma care in this country was terrible. It was a disaster. GW was no different. In 1976, there was an assassination on a Chilean ambassador, a former Chilean ambassador, and they went to GW, and the care there, the doctors told me, was just a disaster. I mean, they both died. Well, one, he was really in bad shape. The woman may have made it, but she was really hurt. And Joe Giordano, a doctor, takes over trauma care at this hospital in 1976 and fixes it, brings it in line with the cutting-edge technologies at the time, so that by 1979, GW was a fully certified trauma center, and they could treat Ronald Reagan like that. If this had happened, if somehow Ronald Reagan had beaten Jerry Ford and then beaten Jimmy Carter in 1976, and this had happened in 1977, I'm not sure that if even Jerry Parr, whoever was head of the detail at that time, got Reagan GW, he would have lived, because they would have been waiting around for orders. That's how they did it. The doctor would be like, hey, you do this, and you do this, we do that. And in a case like this, Ronald Reagan's life literally hung the balance of a few minutes. And the doctors told me that if Jerry Parr had gone to the White House and not the hospital, he would have died. Now looking back, they're emphatic about that. You also learn in reporting this book, I also learned how serious the situation was when I was interviewing a 31-year-old surgical intern. GW deserves a lot of credit for saving Reagan's life on this day because they treated him like any other patient. Imagine how hard that is. This is the President of the United States, and they're treating him like any other patient. Now, what do you mean by that? Well, they had all these people around, they did the protocols. In the operating room, Ben Aaron was approached by a couple other doctors, very prominent ones, very good skilled surgeons, asked if they could assist. And he said, no, I want my normal team. As part of that normal team had a 31-year-old surgical intern. A 31-year-old surgical intern, a mere kid in surgical terms, is in there in the operating team. As Dr. Ben Aaron is hunting for the bullet and worried about the New York Daily News headline the next day, Doc leaves bullet in president, that actually went through his mind, and worried that the bullet may migrate through an artery and go to Reagan's brain, this 31-year-old surgical intern reached his hand into the president's chest and cupped his beating heart in his hand and gently pulled it aside so he could give him more room. And that's when it hit me. Holy cow. This is a lot more serious. And we look back at it. He was shot and he lived. History didn't change. And as I reported it out more and more, I came to realize what this day meant to Ronald Reagan and the country. Because is this a little intimidating audience, Mrs. Reagan, but Mrs. Reagan's here, and she raced the hospital. And I interviewed George Opfer, her lead agent, and he talked about how in the world am I going to control Mrs. Reagan? He's going up this incline, this ramp to the solarium where she had been. And in his mind, it's like, I got to control this situation, but I don't know how I'm going to do it, so I'm going to try. She basically says a few words to her, and he's following her down toward the stairs already. She's leaving for the hospital. And she gets to the hospital, and there's a wonderful moment in your memoir, which I must say was the most accurate memoir, recollection, must have been based on a diary entry. It was by far the most accurate of all the memoirs. A lot of people wrote them years later, and there's some people's memoirs did a lot of memoirs, and they all changed facts as the memoirs went along, which made it very difficult for me to decide which one to rely on. Yours was very accurate. And she gets into the hospital, and she sees Mike Deaver, her top aide, or one of Reagan's top aides, and says, Mike, they have to let me see him. They don't know how it is with us. Which also emphasized to me that this is kind of an American love story in a way this day. Anyway, so Mrs. Reagan gets to see President Reagan, and after they've cleaned up the area, and she gets to go. And he has, by the way, by now, so they've stabilized him. They've injected him with lots of fluid. They've increased his heartbeat. Another doctor has inserted a chest tube into his side to drain the blood, because that's what you do in these situations. You drain the blood. And it's not stopping. And it's very painful. But when Ronald Reagan sees Mrs. Reagan, the first thing he says is, honey, I forgot to duck. Then later, as he's wheeled to surgery, he sees Baker, Meese, and Deaver, his three top aides, and says, who's minding the store? And later in the operating room, and remind me, we have to come back to this, he gets up on an elbow, takes off the oxygen mask, and says, I hope you're all Republicans, to the doctors. And they all laugh and everything, and that's really funny. But what that did was, Ronald Reagan, and I got a little grief from some people about this, but I said Ronald Reagan had one of the most scripted presidencies up to that point in U.S. history, probably the most up to that point. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I mean that he was the one in charge, and he liked having things planned out and being disciplined. But I think it's hard to connect with the American people in that way when you're so disciplined. This day, the script got thrown out, gone. And what it did was, when the American people heard that Lynn Nofsinger, one of his rumpled aides, if you've ever seen Lynn Nofsinger, you know, he's rumpled, he has this always a blue sport coat, goatee, looks like he was, you know, wrestled with by his kids that morning because his hair is always askew. And he delivered these lines, he told the press and the world these one-liners. And the American people really liked it. Here's a guy, we've just had a string of failed presidencies, basically. Lyndon Johnson, Kennedy's killed, Lyndon Johnson didn't seek a full second term because of Vietnam. Nixon resigns under Watergate. Gerald Ford had 3 years. Jimmy Carter was a victim of malaise. And here is Ronald Reagan cracking these jokes and one-liners in the hospital, laughing at death. And I think the American people really liked that. And it helped bond with them. Lou Cannon, probably the most esteemed Reagan biographer, told me that, you know, what this day did too was made people feel for Ronald Reagan like he was a relative in trouble. Because he's kind of like that, you know, a grandfatherly figure, and they really bonded to him. And so what's also surprised me on this day, to understand what that did, it broke down barriers and allowed Reagan and the country to separate the person from the politics. Also, what I didn't know was on this day, at that very time, Reagan had the lowest approval rating of any president in their first term in U.S. history. It was a rough time. Evans and Novak had written a column that very day that said the honeymoon is over. After the shooting, people see who he really is. They hear these funny jokes and one-liners, and they bond with him in a way. And that saved him later in trouble, and it allowed people, I think it was one of the defining moments and recalibrated his entire presidency. And I think because his life came down to a split-second decision in 1 inch, we can ask ourselves, what would have happened on March 31st, 1981, if George H.W. Bush had woken up as president? And this hadn't happened, and people didn't get this unvarnished look at a president. What would the world be like today? And just to go back to this one story, it's really funny. And then we'll take some questions. Ronald Reagan, in the ER, delivers this great line. You know, I hope you're all Republicans. But Jerry, what did he do just 20 minutes earlier?
He asked me, I hope you all are Republicans in the ER.
And so Ronald Reagan delivers this line in the ER, I hope you're all Republicans. Looking up at Jerry Parr, a nurse hears him say this, and she's like, in her mind, she's like, okay, buddy, this isn't a time for joking. You better shut up because you could die. A technician also hears him say this. And so I'm thinking, oh, that's really interesting. You know, Ronald Reagan tested the line. And if you know anything about Reagan history, you know, he does this quite frequently. He'll throw out a line, go, ooh, I could use that later in a debate. He puts it in his pocket. I'm like, but did he really, you know? And then I'm like, I read, you know, and I went through Reagan's filmography, 53 movies, and I watched a bunch of them, and he didn't get the credit as an actor he deserved, because I thought these movies are really fun, and a lot of them are great. And I realized I'm watching Newt Rocky All-American. I'm like, God, what a great deathbed scene he had. That was great. He delivers the line perfectly. Then I watched King's Row, right? And King's Row, his best scene is he's sitting there, his legs have just been amputated, he's in a bed, he goes, where's the rest of me? I'm like, wait a minute. His two most famous movies, and his two best scenes in those two famous movies, are hospital-like deathbed scenes. Is it any surprise that Ronald Reagan threw out a line in the ER, put it in his back pocket, realized that the presidency was a role to play, and knew that he wanted to deliver this line again? And he's about to go into surgery, and he delivers this line pitch perfectly. Now, I appreciate this because I had surgery 2 months ago at GW Hospital, and I was going to deliver my own line. And it was going to be something like, don't kill the guy who glorified how GW Hospital saved Ronald Reagan's life 30 years ago. Haha. I'm not, okay, hey, listen. Okay, I'm not as funny as Ronald Reagan. Okay, I'm not. I can't tell the same stories. Well, you know, I'm getting wheeled in, and the doctor's like, yeah, you won't remember any of this. We just injected you with this and that, whatever. And this is planned surgery. It's not a big deal. Okay, I'm getting ready. I'm getting ready to deliver my line. And all right, start counting to 10. Counting back from 10. I'm like, wait a minute. Because I was so discombobulated by the whole experience, I couldn't deliver my one line. And when my wife and I were driving back from the hospital, I had nasal surgery, not to get too personal, but like packing up there. And I'm like, honey, you know what, I forgot to deliver my line. And it was very disappointing to me because I wanted to do it, but what that did for me, and I wish I had had this experience in a way before I'd written the book, was to understand really, this day really was kind of an unvarnished look at Ronald Reagan, and because as he often quoted Thomas Paine, there's a great line by Thomas Paine that I always mangle, so I'm going to look it up and forgive me. There's a great line by Thomas Paine that describes basically what this day meant, I think. I love the man that can smile in trouble, that can gather strength from distress, and grow brave by reflection. And to me, that was Ronald Reagan on this day. So thank you. What?
Are we leaving?
No, she's going to take some questions.
Jerry and Dell have agreed to take questions. If I could ask you a favor, we have people with microphones. If you could please wait for the microphone to be identified as we are live streaming and we need to be able to catch it. Right here.
I remember reading back some, when this happened, that the .22 ammo that was used was explosives, like made by Devastator. Was that true?
He actually, on his way back, Hinckley's kind of an interesting story. He's obsessed with Jodie Foster. He gets all these guns. The guns are actually confiscated once at an airport in Nashville. He had stalked Carter. And he had the guns in his bag, and they went through the x-ray machine, smart guy. And the guy confiscated the guns. They gave him a $62 fine. That's it, let him on his way. So he goes and buys more guns. And he buys Devastator ammunition, along with a lot of other ammunition. And in his bags, when the FBI agents searched the bags, they found 37 other rounds of ammunition, but not the Devastator ammunition, because that's what he used that day. Devastator bullets were capped with about 28 milligrams of lead azide, and that's a high explosive when there's enough force to cause it to explode. And at the time, this was a really in vogue bullet, because people thought, ooh, this does a lot of damage. Not only does it hit you with a punch, it explodes. Well, he used a snub-nosed pistol, which didn't generate enough velocity to cause most of the bullets to explode on impact. The one that hit Tim McCarthy didn't explode. The one that hit Thomas Delahanty didn't explode. And in fact, when they removed the bullet from McCarthy, and they eventually removed the bullet from President Reagan, and they didn't remove the one from Tom Delahanty. He went to a different hospital because it was too close to his spine. But when they heard it was Devastator bullet, 4 days later, they operated on him in bulletproof vests to pull out the bullet. Now, in researching the book, I talked to a bunch of firearms experts, because I'm not a firearms expert, and you want to make sure you get this stuff right. And the guy I talked to, like the head of the Firearms Association of Examiners, and he said, those bullets, don't do as much damage actually as hollow point bullets or other bullets, because when they hit the target, they explode and they lose a lot of their kinetic energy and force. And that Reagan and the others may have been worse off if it had been a hollow point round, which is what the service used, because when it hits, it flattens out like this and tears a channel through you. And so when the one that hit Reagan hit off the side of the limousine, slipped through that gap, the explosive charge was probably dissipated anyway. But if they had left it in them, later Ben Aaron, the surgeon who removed the bullet, told me that he's kind of glad he did hunt around a little longer. He was going to thinking about sewing up the president and giving up looking for the bullet, because it's not medically necessary usually to remove a bullet. But he said, I removed it, and I'm glad I did, because what would have happened is that we'd be going back in to get it out again. Because who wants, once they hear it's an explosive bullet, even if the charge has been expended, that's just the political implications of that are disastrous. Question?
Right here.
Yes, I came in late, so maybe you've already covered this issue, so a brief response would be fine. But when John Hinckley had his gun, was he in the first row, second row, or third row? Did he have to reach out between people? Did any of those people react? I mean, obviously, in that brief time, probably didn't have time to react, but it seems like it might be time to react. If you're standing right there, you're going to do something with your shoulder or something.
It was, I really benefited from getting the FBI reports on this moment, because it really helped explain what happened. And D.V. McCarthy, one of the first agents who tackled Hinckley, actually has died. But there's a gripping trial testimony and some other reports I dug out that no one had seen before. And in doing this, Hinckley pulls out a gun, he slips forward to the first row and starts shooting. He was like right near he's either right next, there's different testimony about where he actually was, but he's either right next to the wall, a brick wall, or there's a person between him and another person in the brick wall, and he starts shooting. And he gets off these shots in 1.7 seconds. And Herbert Granger, a DC police officer, and D.V. McCarthy both described that moment of going after Hinckley when they heard the gunfire. D.V. McCarthy in his trial testimony, it was the most gripping trial testimony I've ever read. It's like, I have to get that gun, I have to get that gun, I have to get that gun. You know, he can't believe this is happening. He's like flying through the air. You see him in the videos, flying through the air to tackle him. Herb Granger describes it. Here's the gunfire. He's looking away from the crowd. He hears the gunfire, turns around, sees this guy tracking the president from right to left, and he is lunging at him. And he's like, you know, it felt like I was running through syrup, and every noise was if someone had had a tape recorder and hit slow motion on the tape recorder. And they heard, you know, the sounds of slow motion as he's going towards this guy with the gun. He had to get that gun. And they collided that second and hit with such force against the wall that the casing of Herb Granger's Timex watch shattered. And so they reacted as quickly as they could. And as they were falling to the ground, Hinckley's still clicking the gun. Click, 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 click.
Right here.
I have two questions actually for Agent Parr. The first one was, did GW have any idea or any way of knowing that you were coming in with the President of the United States on your way there?
Yes, I believe he read it in the Washington Post the same day he came.
I'm sorry, no, the hospital. Did the hospital have any way of knowing that you were coming in with the President of the United States?
Oh, the hospital? Oh,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. The hospital, you mean GW Hospital?
Yeah,
Yes, we had radioed, we had a direct line from the control room beneath the Oval Office, and the agent there picked up a phone and it rang in the emergency room, and they said the President is on the way. They may not have thought that was the truth, because we checked that every shift. 8 to 4 shift would always pick it up, and there was a test. The 4 to 12 would do the same thing. The midnight shift would do the same thing. We wanted to always make sure that it worked. Well, it worked that day, but they weren't as enthusiastic in their response to him. So he heard the sirens and the agents with their Uzis out. And he told him, he said, the sirens that you hear mean that the President's going to be arriving there in about 30 seconds. And what they had to do was go down Pennsylvania Avenue, go around that big circle, and then come into the emergency room. And one of them went out and looked, and sure enough, there were 2 agents with Uzis outside the car. That's unheard of unless you really do have an emergency. And they thought it was an emergency because, you know, they knew that there had been an attack on him, so they didn't know what was waiting for us at the hospital. You never know all this kind of stuff.
My second question was, when you were in the car and you realized when you pulled out the napkin that there was blood, did you realize also at that moment how severe it was? I mean, did you see the bullet wound and, you know, try to stop the blood and all that and realize that it was that bad?
I never found any blood on my hands, and I knew from my training that oxygenated blood is bright red and it's frothy. And what I thought for a fleeting moment was that when I came down on top of his back, his chest hit the transmission riser, which is about 8 inches high in that car. And I may have cracked a rib. That's what I really thought. And so I needed to take him to the hospital if he had any kind of a lung injury like that. So that was the reason I made the decision quickly. Before we got to Pennsylvania Avenue, we knew the exact route, how to get there. Those agents had actually run that route. We had a female agent named Marianne Gordon who was in charge of the routes that day. She ran that route physically with that whole group of cars, the lead car, the limousine, and the follow-up car. Those are all Secret Service cars that we used in that particular formation. And so all the agents had seen what it looked like. They knew how to get there, and all I had to do to say to Drew was, let's go to GW. They all knew how to get there.
Can I follow up real quick? Mind?
Yes.
What's really interesting is that they didn't, like Jerry said, they didn't know he was shot until he got on the gurney. And in fact, one of the doctors who spotted it, what's a great thing about being a historian in a way, and this is the perfect time to tell this story 30 years later, is because it forced me to interview so many more people than is necessary to do the story. If I'd done it 5 years after, I would have interviewed a few surgeons and written it, the book or whatever. But their memories aren't great in every detail, so you have to interview everyone in a room to get the details you need to tell the story. In one case, I interviewed a guy named Drew Sheely, who was on an anesthesiology rotation. He was like 30. He's a Vietnam veteran, had been badly wounded in Vietnam. He hears the page, he's an adrenaline junkie. He goes down to the ER to see what's going on. And he gets there and he sees Reagan. He doesn't really realize Reagan. Then he realizes it's President Reagan. They tilt him up, and he sees a tiny little slit. And that's why it was so difficult. It was a tiny little slit. This bullet was flattened, and it hit the president like a saw, like if you threw a saw like that. Hit him there, it hits a rib, and tumbles and starts chewing up tissue in the lung. And he sees a little slit, only a little blood's coming out, but he sees a slit, and he immediately knows, because he's been in Vietnam and been wounded. He looks down and tells Wes Price, another doctor, hey, that's a bullet wound. And then the phone you were talking about was actually installed by the Secret Service in the 1970s, a direct connection between the White House and the hospital. And the agent Joe Traynor got on there, and got the signal board to put him through. He was like, the president's on its way. And you raised a good point about Marianne Gordon, who's like, what you agree is one of the unsung heroes of that day.
What? Unsung hero, sure enough.
Because Marianne Gordon is in charge of the whole motorcade situation. She is one of a handful of female Secret Service agents. She's the first female Secret Service agent to ever drive a president of the United States. And you want to talk about a tough lady? It's Marianne Gordon. Well, the shooting happens. She leaps from the scout car, runs back to the shooting. By then, that limousine's gone. It's taken off. What does she do? She sees the spare limousine. There's a spare limousine always. And in the spare limousine is Dr. Daniel Ruge, who's the White House physician, because he always travels with the president. And he had been standing on the sidewalk, and when everyone fell to the ground, this is in his FBI report that I got, fell to the ground every morning, Dan Ruge memorized what the president was wearing, put it in his memory. And he's thinking, okay, the president's wearing a blue pinstripe suit today, because Dan Ruge has passed away since then, in his FBI report. And he looks down, doesn't see anyone with a blue pinstripe suit on the ground, so he knows the president's gotten away. So he jumps in the spare limousine. Marianne Gordon has no place to go. She dives in the spare limousine. Then she vaults over the front seat to get there and tells Bob Weekley, the driver, let's go. They take off. They eventually catch up to the limousine. And there's a great moment. Has anyone here been stuck by a presidential motorcade in traffic? Well, if you could relate it to your seatmate, it sucks. Because it takes forever. I mean, I've been stuck when I was a kid in one of yours, but no offense, Mrs. Reagan. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. Well, on this day, imagine this. Jerry Parr is in that backseat of the limousine looking out. There are 3 bodies on the ground. There's a bullet mark in the window, and they're alone. That limousine took off and left everyone behind. They're on Connecticut Avenue, and that limousine is alone. There's a driver, Jerry Parr, and the president. That's it. And Jerry Parr doesn't know if the world's at war, if it's a decapitation strike, what is going on. They're alone. Think of that. So Marianne Gordon, hopping in that spare limousine, gets it going. The follow-up car finally catches up. The spare limousine's there. They finally get some police escort. They're heading down Connecticut Avenue to the White House. Then they hear on the radio, Marianne Gordon hears, they're diverting to the hospital. And she goes, oh no, I don't have the radio to communicate with the DC cops to let them know we're making the turn on Pennsylvania. It's a very sharp turn. Well, she knows they're going to keep going. She orders the driver to speed up to get ahead of the presidential limousine, because someone has to take the hit if something else happens. If assassins pull out in cars, that spare limousine's the battering ram to get in the hospital. She has the foresight to do that. Because what happens next is, of course, the DC cops just keep going to the White House, and their radio calls are actually it's funny, but they're, in retrospect, because of the Secret Service radio calls, they're all very stoic. Rawhide is okay. Rawhide is okay. And you're like, show some emotion, It's like Rawhide is very, very, by protocol. The DC police, on the other hand, oh my God, the president's been shot. We gotta get to the hospital. Oh my God. Don, what happened? Oh, yeah. They're screaming. Frankly, you can't really make out what they said. I even had the audio people at Macmillan, one of my publishers, try to enhance it so I could hear what they were saying. No, they're screaming. And so they just kept going. Marianne Gordon had the foresight to get that spare limousine in front of that limousine on the way to the hospital in case anything happened. I just think that it's one of those unsung hero moments. Sorry, I didn't mean to interject that.
You're right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Oh, no.
Right over here.
Sorry.
Agent Parr, was the Secret Service at all concerned that there might be a second assassination attempt, maybe at the hospital in case the president was hit or anything like that?
Yes. We always think about that. We had nobody there ahead of time. If we'd known we were going, we'd have had, a regular survey done, and it would have been posts put around and a lot of agents around. So the first thing I said to Ray Shattuck, my shift leader, I said, set up a perimeter. That meant that I was with another agent, Dale McIntosh, were the closest ones to him in that room where we could catch his eye or see what was actually going on with him all the time. Then another agent would be there with a nurse to let the right people in. And so we'd set up a perimeter with the agents that we had. We arrived, including myself, with about 9 agents. So we set up a security perimeter, starting out with his body, working out systematically, cutting off access. And since we were so close to the Washington field office and headquarters, within 20 minutes we had 300 agents there, and the uniform division. I mean, and so we set up posting assignments just based on survey reports that we had done in the past. There's always a survey report for all the hospitals in the Washington area, just in case we were emergency thing happened, we would go there and we would know where to stand and what needed to be cut off. And within, I would say, 30 minutes of arriving there, we had a first-class operation done. It's like moving the entire Secret Service culture at the White House right on down to the hospital. We had places where Mrs. Reagan could come and stay, and with her friends and with the family that eventually showed up. And we handle all that stuff. Places, you have to have a place for the press. You have to have a press agent. So it's not easy. I mean, there's a lot of things you wouldn't think about. It's not just the president, the operating room. Who do you want in the operating room? And a lot of things that had to be handled before the operation and afterwards when he was in recovery, in the recovery room, and then where he was sick ill for a long time. But he made a good recovery, you know, and he recovered in 14 days and came back. And then we had Tim McCarthy that was there also, and then Jim Brady. He was hit in the head, and he was the most grievously wounded, of course. And he's still impaired from that 30 years.
May I ask Jerry a last question? Today, when we were being interviewed by one of these TV stations, you had a great quote. You said, "This was my best day and my worst day." Could you describe what that meant and what this meant to you?
Well, CNN wanted to do a special, which has come out since that time, about 200X. 200X is the 21.5-foot automobile that the president was riding. It was the primary presidential vehicle for about 10 years. And it weighed actually 6.5 tons, full of armor. And every place on it was covered. And when I was at the Ford Museum, and they opened the back door, I had the strangest feeling looking at that empty space there. And that's why I said it to, I think, Drew Griffin, the anchor guy that worked with me on this program. What we were trying to show is how I grabbed the president, you know, with my hand on his left shoulder and tried to push him down, and then my right hand above in the back of his neck. With Shattuck's help, we're trying to get him down into the car. He knew exactly where we were headed. I mean, he didn't try to stand up and do anything like that. He was completely at our mercy to push him in that way. He knew we were trying to get him out of harm's way. But I thought it was the worst day, because had he passed away, it would have been where it probably would have happened, or he would have been unconscious in there. But it didn't happen, and I thought that was the best thing that happened to me. And that the decision to take him to the hospital was half intuition and half rational thought. I mean, he just looked bad. It was too much blood. And I know if you take a president to the hospital, the stock market starts to fall and the Russians get all excited, you know, and, you know, it's like World War III or something when a president really gets hurt. So I knew that taking him there would be a very big deal. I didn't know how big, though, until they found that bullet in him. So there you are.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Del and Jerry have graciously signed a number of books so that if you do not have one, you didn't get one earlier, they will be available for sale outside here once we finish. And I think it's a good time to announce tonight, since we have so many Secret Service friends with us, Many of you know that we completely renovated our museum in honor of the President's 100th birthday this year. We have one final exhibit that will be opening in the next couple of months, and it will be a tribute to the United States Secret Service as they protect the President when he travels around the world. So we hope you'll all come back to see that. If I could ask you just to remain in your places while we ask the First Lady to depart, and then we will let you all go and get your books. If you don't have them, that would be great. Thank you all for coming.